So as we get started in the movie, we get this theme really quickly, looking at a couple of different small vineyard owners versus going to this wine consultant and talking about just how they talk about the wine, how they carry themselves. A lot of the small vineyard owners, they really do see wine making as an art, as something that is special. You have this relationship with nature, and it's a big deal for them, and it's very sentimental. Whereas the wine consultant didn't have that same attitude. He was more of, I know what makes things good, and that's what we do. The quote that really stuck out to me when he said it was, someone was like, oh, well, you want to micro-oxygenate this, but that's specific to your taste. And he was like, well, yeah, not everybody has the same taste. That's called diversity. And that's why there's so much bad wine. And I was like, it was very bold to assume that what he likes, everybody's gonna like. It was a very just snobby tone, which is something we hadn't got from the small winemakers as much. More of again, that artistry, that sentiment. Then the film goes and looks at an even bigger picture. It looks at wine as a business, and specifically starting with the Mondovino family. And this is my perspective on it, which will not be the same as everyone's, is the Mondovino family seemed just very greedy. They kept saying, oh, they were jealous. They were scared we were also going to make great wine. They already had ample land. Why couldn't they continue to, they could still make great wine just from a different area. Like, why do you need even more land to make more wine? Like, you do good with what you have. And then you could collaborate, you could share grapes or something. Granted, maybe I'm totally off base, but it just struck me as very greedy rather than, oh, we just want to make great wine. Like, no, they wanted more land and more profit. That's very much the vibe I was getting. And then the second family, the Staglin family, I did not like them at all. They were going through the house and she was talking about having the art, and I was like, okay, like, you can have art's art. I respect that. Having nice art is something you should talk about, but it came off as very just wealthy, like, oh, we have the #1 ceramic sculpture in the world piece in our backyard. Like, a very status based. Similar with, they talked about how they did their landscaping and how they brought in almost every tree and shrub, which I don't like because that takes away from the biodiversity of the area, which is important for wine. And what made me the most mad about the Staglin family was when they were in the field and they were chatting with a worker, and I think it was one of the marketing heads, and they were saying, oh, so most of your field workers are Mexican. Well, are there any, if they know the grapes really well, are there any Mexican winemakers? And they're like, oh, no, they mostly work in the fields. And that's where math just didn't math. I would want representation in the field. If they know a lot about the grapes, then why shouldn't they be given a shot at trying to make wine? And then when the lady of the house, Mrs. Sagler, was chatting, she's like, oh, we know them all by name, and we make sure to give them like a gift every year, like a t-shirt or a hat. A hat? When you have $200 million in profit, you're giving your workers a hat? Like, I feel like you could do better. And not like a nicer hat, like a nice Christmas bonus. And maybe they do that. Maybe that's on top of everything else. But from what from what I took away, it did not seem that way. Now, before I get into the second half of the movie review, I did want to comment on how cute the dogs were. The very French dog that was just munching on some cheese in like the first 5 minutes was adorable, and then the Basset Hound and Bulldog from the guy whose nose is insured. I think his name's Robert. Yeah, they were very cute dogs in the film, which I did appreciate. So in the second half of the movie, we get more into to take a quote from the movie, the Napaization of wine, and how there are a few key players that really set the rating system, which I found interesting, especially considering how wine is changing, and I know how people my age and maybe millennials don't care as much about a label or an objective rating. So I don't know if they're as influential. I'm sure they still have a lot, but I'm not sure how that's changed from 2004. And then the other thing I thought was interesting, and this ties into the first part of the video, was how winemakers were saying everything's going towards this one taste, and winemakers are losing the terroir, how each wine is a little different. And you could tie that into capitalism, into more big wineries coming out, and there's less small ones, which it's interesting because, again, it goes back to the point I made earlier where my take on Mondovino was they're just greedy. So yeah, it's interesting to think about it. It's sad to think of different terroirs all just becoming the same plain Jane thing.